Today I'm going to talk about these three Christian saints. There are also all three of them doctors of the church, so they are quite important mystics. You can see here they are Hildegard von Bingen, Caterina da Siena, and John of the Cross, John de la Cruz. All of them quite famous. So before I start, some preliminary remarks. Of course, there are methodological problems discussing mystic and art. With art, I mean here literature. I will discuss the three different forms in which the saints try to express their mystical experience. So, 2 points I want to highlight. Is there a special character of the mystic? And is the mystical experience theistic or non-theistic? We will see these three saints, they all feature some points about this. And is the evolution of a mystic and its representation and content and form. So how this mystical experience is being expressed in the different contexts, historical context, and not only. I want to highlight briefly like gender differences and the problems this can be in expression. Then educational literacy too. Since these three mystics, they all have very different grades of education, and their ability to write down their experience was very different. And then the need of the mystic to be expressed. I want to show how these mystics, after their experience, they felt they had to express this. So to move on to the first one, it's Hildegard von Bingen. Now she is quite famous today, but until like the past century, she was like kind of forgotten because her writings are quite hard to be translated and understood. But now there's a lot of literature about her. So here's some data about her life. I don't want to talk too much about this. Everybody can find more in studies, but what I want to point out here is she had visions since early childhood, precisely the age of 3. And at this age, psychological research tells that, I mean, the personality is still forming itself. So since she claimed that in these visions, she saw a great light, and this light is not possibly understood as theistic. So she could not have understood this light as God. Just later on, she expressed this light as God. She understood this into her life experience. She became an abbess, and so she had a career in the church, and she kept this experience secret. Until at the age of 42, she felt a voice from the sky that she said it was God, telling her, right, much like other famous examples we can see, like Muhammad in Islam, and also like shamanic call sometimes feature this kind of contact with the spirits. In fact, she felt ill until she accepted to write her experience, and she did so in 3 texts in a trilogy. The first one is the Sivias. The second one that I'm gonna discuss briefly here is the Liber Vitae Meritorum, and then the Liber Divinorum Operum. So in her writing, Hildegard is trying to present her experience with very encyclopedic and Middle Ages imagination and understanding of the world. She was a botanical, she had medical knowledge, and so in her text we can find like references to words that she made up. She used a lot of new words in her weird Latin, since she was literate, but she said she was indocta. So words like viriditas, that means like something like life, kind of springing of life. And we can also see how she presents God. In the second work, the Liber Vitae Meritorum, Hildegard is writing a psychomachia, which is a kind of common genre at her time, in which vices and virtues are fronting each other. And the vices are presented as monstrosities, like theomorphic, anthropomorphic creatures. that are trying to explain why they behave so. But then there's always the rebut from the virtues from the sky. So, and why we can see vices are incarnated, so earthly and cataphatic. You can see how the virtues are disembodied. We cannot see them, just voices. So they are apophatic, because the nearer you go to God, which is invisible per excellence, the more invisible you become. And so we have this God that it at the same time light, but also in her writings, it's the universal man called Vir, and it's like an axis mundi standing in the center of the cosmos and structuring all the universe, and so her work. But to point out another interesting point about Hildegard's writings and this way of expression, she had this weird Latin I was talking about, and here in the in this excerpt from a letter to Bernard de Clairvaux, you can see, if somebody understands Latin, you can see it's very peculiar. And she's saying in this letter that she was very worried about this vision that appeared to her soul, that she never saw this with physical eyes. Now, this can be problematic because in another letter, she's saying this while wide awake. She's just walking and seeing these visions. So she may mean that she's well aware these visions are not physically there, but also she's trying to justify herself in front of male theologians that are the main interpreters of the tradition in Christianity at our time. In fact, she's saying she's just a woman, and so she's miserable, and she could have not understood this if not by the help of God. So she's basically saying Hildegard is a tool, and God is sending her the vision, and at the same time, he's making the interpretation. She's just writing down. So she's, yeah, like, it's a way to be humble, but also to justify her vision and say, I'm not mad, just this is what God sent me. So to sum up very briefly, she had a lifelong experience since the age of 3. And this vision is in the form of a great light. I see like here, primal, something that she could not express if not through all this process of incorporation into her context, the context she lived in. She was forced to write. She did not want to write. Of course, we can interpret this voice from above in many ways. There's a lot of psychological interpretation of this. I mean, I don't want to dig in too much here. And then, so we had this first vision, and then this vision is interpreted and is put into form. So from the vision to the linguistic level, the semantical and syntactical level, the contextual one into her middle-age time. And then God is giving the interpretation, and Hildegard is interpreting the interpretation. So if you try to read the text, you will face a very high complexity. It is just to express this vision that is in her words and in other mystics' words, inexpressible, ineffable. So, okay, to move on to the next slide, to Caterina, another very famous mystic. So I give for granted some points of her life. Here, there are some data anyway. I want to focus on the first vision again at the age of 6. Here, we have a personality that is already developed in their basics. So Caterina's vision is theistic at first, and for her life. In fact, the life of Caterina by Raymond of Capua is saying us that at the first vision Caterina had, she was in the street with dogs, people walking, and while she was still seeing all this, she saw Christ in a bridal chamber, surrounded by saints and kings and popes. And after this, her life changed. She decided to be, she was already religious, but she decided to devote all her life to Christ. And she produced a virginity vow at the age of 7. Of course, in a time that we have to understand is so, in which marriage was something very early, very important matter also. So she always denied she was refused to marry any mortal man because she was promised to Christ, and at the age of 20, she had this mystical marriage. And 3 years later, she exchanged heart with Christ. In fact, we can see that Caterina identified herself strongly with Christ, but this identity has a problem since she was a woman, and in Christian in Christian context, she could not say like I am God, because she was a woman and because this was problematic, of course. Even if she experienced something like this, it would be interesting to see like how Caterina experienced in depth. Would be very similar to other experiences such as Meister Eckart's one. Just she didn't have the philosophical complexity, the philosophical understanding of all these matters that other mystics had. So she expressed herself with symbols. The only thing she had, since she was illiterate, completely illiterate, she could not write nor read. In fact, the only two texts we had for her by her dialogue, orations are not of her production or later on. We had almost 400 letters, and these letters she never wrote them. She was just speaking to some other monk or like disciple of her who was writing down. And in these letters, she's basically translating the mystical theology from her dialogue, the book as she called it, in which she is expressing her vision of God, that in the dialogue is just conveyed by Caterina talking directly to God. They are discussing, she's asking questions to God and he's answering. And in the letters is kind of reverse. She's answering questions from other people, from the Pope to common folk. And she's doing this by symbols, not because she wanted to appear humble for some complexity that she cannot unravel for others, but more because she's understanding her own vision as in this symbolic way. So she's using a lot of symbols, but two of them are very important, and are fire and blood. Here I put some excerpts from her letters. These translations are mine, so I'm sorry if they're not, they cannot be as good as the original Sinese dialect, but more or less, she's saying that this desire arises with the light of the intellect, so first symbol, this light, to reflect itself into the inviolable fire of divine love. So love is conceived as a fire, something that is burning, that is giving life, and it's also ineffable. It's a symbol, but it's something you cannot catch, something you can never grasp because it's moving, it's changing. And moving on, see for yourselves, because in him you find yourself, and in yourself you find him. So already a basic of mystical theology. Thus may your heart explode and fall apart by watching such a fire flame of love, which is God into man and man into God. And even more, let us inebriate with this precious blood, and for the love of the blood we will desire, with virtuous love, to give blood, and life for the love of life. So all these alliterations, this kind of poetic prose, that is just the production of her speech. She's just talking and saying whatever comes into her mind to express this mystical experience that is so deep, but for her it's so complex to express, and also so easy. She's trying to make her disciples understand what she's feeling, how to see life in this new way. And again, this blood removes every pain and gives every pleasure. It deprives man of himself, and he finds himself into God. So blood and fire are two symbols that she's using a lot to express this sense of selflessness. Whenever you can remove yourself, your separated self, you can find yourself into God. You can realize this unity that is already there, as we will see with another mystic. So basically, Caterina is saying, from her early mystical experience and this strong identification with God that is common to her time, to kind of female mystical revival, she is expressing this unity through mystic literacy, through the this active use of mysticism is directed to an application. She's not just bending on herself as other mystics did. Some mystics never expressed themselves, but she felt she had to do this. And yeah, this double level of interpretation that I presented, these metaphors from everyday life that everybody can understand, but that bear a deep theological meaning. And then I put this last character, this personality that everybody know, I'm sure, John of the Cross, probably the most famous mystic in Christianity, and not because he's using a lot of comparisons with other traditions. Again, you have some data, but I will talk very shortly about John because, yeah, because he is very famous, and because I mainly put him as a like to counteract the other two mystics, since gender can be very problematic in the reception of mystic, in the interpretation of the mystic, of his own mystical experience. So what happens with John is that he was a highly educated man, and in comparison with Caterina, their experiences can be more more different, since Caterina is trying to convey this deep experience with easy words, and John is trying to convey this experience with very complex, very elaborated words. In fact, he mastered language. He was very good in philosophical writing, but also in poetry. His poetry is still considered in Spanish tradition one of the highest peak of this of Spanish poetry. So what Joan did basically is using poetry, so a sensuous poetry also, full of images and full of this sensible and sensitive character of him, of understanding of reality, to overcome senses. And then he's using intellectual writing, philosophical understanding of the world, to overcome intellect. The basic of his research of the mystical experience is this understanding of the selflessness that one needs to reach God, which is a nothing. God is a nothing to our senses. So to reach this nothing, this nada, we have to become nothing to ourselves too. In doing this, he's writing down 4 major works. The first one, the Ascension, is then including the second one that usually is separated by the Dark Night of the Soul, which is the 4th part of the Ascension. And this very famous Dark Night is basically John's understanding of the deep moment in which God is absent from our understanding, in which John is saying, if you can overcome this moment and still believing, still clenching to God, you can, let's say, pass to another plane. And then from this dark night, this is already an image, because of course, dark night is giving us some poetic understanding of the thing, as well as the ascension. You can go on until the last point, which is the flame of love, and again, an image. Even when Johann is trying to describe the most apophatic level, he needs to use images, he needs to use language. The point is, he's very good in this because he's concealing the very language he's using. He's producing a lot of images to give us this mystical experience, but he can never go beyond language, even if he's trying. And even at last, when we should be beyond language, we should be in the unity level, in the understanding of Johann. We are still into images, into expression of this. This probably is the most famous piece of poetry of Johann that everybody knows, but I put this anyway. In this dialectical, let's say, seems seemingly paradoxical understanding of the mystical experience. He's trying to express how to reach this point that is beyond particular things, that is God. And it's almost, it's even banal if you understand this, I mean, in its dialectical relationship, because of course, if you want to reach something that is beyond things, you don't have to clench yourself to any particular thing. So if you want to reach satisfaction in all, desire satisfaction in nothing. To come to be what you're not in the end, you must go by a way in which you are not. So John is well aware of this. And after his mystical experience, he is elaborating this in a more complex way than Hildegard or Caterina. He is also well aware of the mystical tradition before him, from I don't know, even Augustine, and then Diogenes. But the point is, he's trying to elaborate his own personal understanding of this. And so what he's doing is trying to walk this apophatic way, but by giving us images when doing this. So he's producing a cataphatic level that is trying to go to an apophatic one. Of course, this is necessary. But in doing this, he's trying to conceal this doing. He's also, yeah, I forgot to say this, but he's writing because Askitsu, he was very able to preach and to speak. But he said also that he wanted to be universal for everybody and particular to no one. So he used writing so to conceal himself again. It's all a work of concealment. He's trying to conceal everything so that one can spoil himself and reach this perfect level of understanding of God. So this conceptual linguist tension, again, is trying to bring us to this breaking of a common understanding of things, common language. And of course, poetry is very apt to this. So in the end, John had a mystical experience that it was his own. It was very particular, just John's understanding of the mystical experience. But he tried, also in the Counter-Reformation context, to give to this interpretation of him a universal doctrinal recognition. He's putting it like what he experienced, and he's not saying that he'd experienced this. He's saying this as if this is the mystical experience everybody undertakes. Instead, it's just his particular experience. And to conclude, these three mystics had very different expressions of the mystic experience. The point is, my point is, I don't think we can say their mystical experience is what they express. I believe it's more correct to say their mystical experience is forever removed from our understanding. And what they did is to talk around it, like they had an experience that cannot be expressed, if not with words, with contextualized words that can never express the real point they experienced. That it was maybe easily represented for us, like by the great light that Hildegard saw, by the fire of Caterina, and by this nothing of John. But they still words and images trying to express a level that, for definition, cannot be expressed. All the same, they had the compulsion to write. Their experience had, even if not communicable, even if ineffable, they had to communicate this. And they tried to do this via the most important and strong technology they had, that is writing, in three different forms. So a visionary, complex, and encyclopedical understanding of the cosmos for Hildegard, everyday symbolism for Caterina, and poetry, but very high one, for John, all to express a common, unified, but not unique Catholic context, since of course the three different understanding of Catholicism by these three saints are very different, and the same Catholicism is different in their time. And in the end, text as an interpretation. So the original experience, as I said, is, in my opinion, ineffable as the amic point of view, trying to say. The point is, we can study it, we can understand it by seeing how they try to express, they try to interpret and understand their own experience, using these symbols that in the end convey more of the person, more of the experiencer than of the experience itself. They're talking about themselves and their context more than of the mystical experience itself, which is just the thing around which everything is spinning. So with this, I conclude, and I hope it was clear. If there are any questions in English, I would be glad to answer.
Now, thank you very much, Francesco. Now, I would like to ask everyone to ask any questions. Ну, если нет вопросов, то тогда мы, наверное, еще раз выразим благодарность Франческо